Ladies and gentlemen, our next guest is general partner with GCC Gummy Cryptos Capital, a Silicon Valley investment fund with over 500 million in assets, including early stage investments in unicorns like OpenSea, Yield Guild Games, Celsius Network, Vega Protocol. Please welcome Miko Matsumura. The stage is yours.
Good morning. It's really wonderful to be here in Poland again. It's a difficult time, as we all know. This opening slide actually it includes a picture of me speaking at the 2017 Blockchain Life conference in St. Petersburg, in Russia. So as we know, this isn't possible, and we know that things are in a very difficult state. This picture includes a familiar building, which is the National Stadium here. And this is actually from my previous trip to Warsaw. So. Very excited to speak today. Now, what I wanted to address today is the topic of freedom. And I know it's a very pressing topic. I think it's important to be sensitive and to be careful. I think it's a little bit it's a bit ridiculous for someone like myself from Silicon Valley to say something ignorant like blockchain fixes huge problems, because what we know is the world is facing war and huge problems. But what I did want to do is, we've all chosen the blockchain industry. So, we must all find our purpose, and we must work to do our best and hopefully help to create a better world. So, I would like to talk about this, in context. So, I took a little note to myself. There is a wonderful slogan that's an informal national slogan in Polish that translates to "for our freedom and yours." Right? This makes me think that this place has a unique perspective on freedom, and will be able to really understand what's needed in this world today. So one thing that I wanted to open with is that I'm aware that over 1 million Ukrainian refugees have come to Poland, and that the Polish people and families have been taking them in. And so for that, I'm very grateful to the people here and to the kind reception for those people who are suffering with war. So for them, I say, Slava Ukraini. My father actually survived World War II in Japan as a young child. His house was destroyed by bombs. This created really a lack of peace. So he really was he struggled. And, this is a lifelong struggle. So, I think for those people, we need to do our best. So there is a kind of freedom where a person says, I do what I want, and there are no rules there are no limits. I think there are limits to this kind of freedom. This kind of freedom produces autocracy. It produces a dictatorship. There's another kind of freedom, which is the idea that we make the rules. This is, of course, Vitalik Buterin, creator of Ethereum. And of course, he, in my mind, symbolizes the creation of a new kind of rule set. So, why is this important? It's important because the existing institutions have failed. And in fact, these are all subject to collapse. So, one thing that we know from 2008, I think our introduction today was Elon Musk's tweet honoring Satoshi Nakamoto. So, in the Genesis block of the Bitcoin blockchain, there is a newspaper headline that talks about bank bailouts. So banking has failed, right? And one of the reasons why the current internet is struggling is because of the concept of hyper-adversaries. So one of the things that's important to understand about blockchain infrastructure is that blockchain infrastructure can handle hyper-adversaries. Hyper-adversaries are part of the blockchain ethos. So for example, if you take a use case of blockchain like privacy, most people, like myself, I frequently tell people, I'm a law-abiding, tax-paying citizen. I have nothing to hide. I don't need privacy. But what about a hyper-adversary? A hyper-adversary can take your private information. They can create a fiction that you have some vast amount of Bitcoin. And then they can publish your home address. A hyper-adversary can make privacy into a serious concern for everyone. So blockchain addresses hyper-adversaries. And in fact, no hyper-adversary has penetrated Bitcoin. So Bitcoin has proven to be strong and difficult to penetrate. So as I mentioned with failings, about 40% of the money supply of the United States has been printed in the last year to 18 months. So, in a way, money printing has allowed governments to pretend that there hasn't been a collapse. Big tech has failed us. This is Mark Zuckerberg. Mark, by the way, doesn't want to run a company called Facebook. He wants to run a company called Meta. Jack Dorsey doesn't want to run a company called Twitter. He wants to run a company called Block, as in blockchain, right? Times are changing and people are realizing that the old ways don't work. And of course, this is the original Lehman Brothers collapse in September of 2008. And of course, Satoshi's Bitcoin white paper was published in October of 2008. So Satoshi knew. And Bitcoin has yet to be penetrated. Bitcoin is a set of rules. And there's only two end-user rules of Bitcoin. One is that the owner of the private key is the owner of the Bitcoin. The second rule is whoever you sent the Bitcoin to is now the owner of that Bitcoin. And you probably won't be able to get a refund. So, to me, Bitcoin, even though trillions of dollars have flowed across Bitcoin, there are 0 occasions where the rules have been broken. People have lost playing the game of Bitcoin, but they probably should have played better. So, I mentioned that we're in a state of the institutions having failed us. So now the world is open. In a way, the world is like a drug addict that has hit rock bottom. Now the world is ready for experiments. This image is actually inside of a tokamak fusion reactor. So the world is experimenting with new sources of carbon-free energy, as our next speaker may point out. Web3. So people use Web3 as a buzzword, right? I don't like it because I don't think there even was a Web2, so how could there be a Web3? But the idea that we must rebuild the internet because the internet does not have sufficient security, and in fact, the internet has broken incentives. If you want to call that Web3, then I am all for Web3. We will rebuild the internet with privacy, with security, and with cryptography. And if you want to call it Web3, and of course digital assets, then that's what we should do. The metaverse is also an experiment. In fact, it is not an experiment, it is thousands of experiments. And what is the metaverse except for thousands of experimental realities? What if there was a reality with no gravity? What if there was a reality with no friction, with no limitations? There are many different realities that we can experiment with, and we're ready for those experiments. What is a DAO? Decentralized Autonomous Organization. A DAO is experimental governance. These are experiments in governance, both corporate governance as well as the idea of governing a new class of organization, almost like a metaverse nation state. My firm, Gumi Cryptos Capital, invested in the seed stage of YGG, or Yield Guild Games, and we see this as almost like the formation of a digital nation state. And if you think about the 4 properties of a nation state, the first one is to print and issue money. They are doing so. The second one is to establish governance. They are doing so. Right? The third one is taxation. Now, in a digital nation state, taxation is voluntary, and it's voluntary in exchange for services. So if a DAO produces a global public utility, it is then capable of taxation. And the only nation-state function that these organizations do not provide is they do not provide a monopoly on the use of violence or the use of force over a geographic region. Tokens. Tokens represent monetary experimentation and experimentation with incentives. So we are ready for these experiments. This is my friend Mike Winkleman, or otherwise known as Beeple. He's the creator of the world's most expensive NFT, and also the creator of an amazing work called Human One, which recently sold for, I think, almost $30 million US. The first one was $69 million US. We're here at Bitcoin Miami. NFTs are basically experimental, unique digital assets, right? So the world is willing to experiment with these as well. And then finally, making it much more personal. An avatar is an experimental personality. And much like traveling, a person can travel and really experiment with their own personality. Well, with an avatar, they can experiment with a variety of personalities, right? So the thing that I think is interesting about the idea of experimental personality, of course, is that people can experiment with, is this avatar, is it a bot? Is it an AI? Is it a human? Is it a corporation? Is it a DAO? We don't really know, but we know that an avatar is an experimental personality, again, because we are ready to experiment, because the institutions that we have counted on have failed, and we have to create new systems. So, coming back to the idea of freedom. So, this gentleman on this slide goes by the name Metakovan. So, Metakovan is actually the buyer of the world's most expensive NFT, and you can see on his screen, this is actually the Beeple NFT, and it's called First 5,000 Days. And Metakovan had a wonderful saying. Metakovan said that crypto is the new America. So, Metakovan isn't from America. He's actually, I think he's from Pakistan, if you look at the flags on his desk. But in a way, if you think about the idea of America, the idea was that people could go there, right? If wherever it was that they were became unacceptable. My father did that. My father was in Japan, and Japan became very unacceptable after World War II. It was very bombed out, and he came to America. So really, America in this context is a place where you go when you don't have a lot of options, and you want to be free. Now, I think it's important to note that as an American, I don't actually think America anymore is the new America. But I think this idea that there's a digital realm where people can go, I think is a pretty exciting idea. So what I talked about earlier is a clash of ideas of freedom. So today, we're stuck with these two ideas of freedom. One idea is this idea that there are no rules, that individuals do whatever they want, right? This is not an okay definition of freedom. I think one of the things that's a little nuts, in my personal opinion, is that in the United States, this country was born out of the fire of revolution. And in a way, in the founding documents, there's enshrined rights related to guns, right? So, in the United States, everybody can buy guns. They can have guns. They can use guns, right? This is, in a way, related to the idea of having unlimited individual freedom, right? And of course, there are limits to the other system as well. The idea that a group can always make rules that are suitable for every single individual case, I think it's also a problem, right? We've seen that a group sometimes creates rules that in very specific cases don't work, right? So this dichotomy, this pressure between there are no rules and then there's a group that makes the rules, I think is something we need to solve. So in blockchain, there is a solution. And in blockchain, the solution is that you fork it and you go. So if there's ever anything you don't like in a blockchain, you are free to fork the blockchain and go. And everyone who agrees with you is also free to go with you. And this is exactly what happened with Vitalik Buterin, which is that when the DAO hacker stole from people and hacked the Ethereum blockchain, Vitalik broke immutability, and he created an entire shadow Ethereum that contained every transaction except the DAO hack. And Vitalik said, I'm going to call this new chain, I'm going to call it Ethereum. Who is with me? So Ethereum core developers went with Vitalik. And everyone else eventually went with Vitalik and said, we're going to call this new chain Ethereum. And people think that that means that Ethereum is a dictatorship because Vitalik broke the rules. He broke immutability. But it isn't, because we went with him by our choice. And those who wish to stay behind remained invested in Ethereum Classic and were able to embrace the principle of immutability over the desire to be with core dev, with Vitalik, and with the kind of future expansion into what is now being called proof of stake Ethereum or ETH2. So what I wanted to say is, while the world is set with problems that are incredibly hard to fix, and in a way we can all sort of just take a moment to appreciate the troubles people are in. One of the things that I think is exciting is that people are donating money to humanitarian efforts in Ukraine. I think the correct way to do it is to reach into your pocket and to donate until it hurts. And the reason why I think it's important that it hurt is that we're all together. And if we're able to distribute some of the hurt, then there may be a small amount less hurt for the people at the front. But I think that, of course, to say that blockchain fixes such problems is nonsense. Right? These problems are too big and too serious. But today what I wanted to share with you is that we have an incredibly exciting future. This is the industry that we've chosen. And the world is ready for our experiments. So we should try them. And hopefully we can create a better world as a result. Thank you.